Some days the news just seems poetic, and I have so much poetry to discuss with you today. Let's go to the first news story. Do you guys remember that story from 2022? Remember there was this Irish pub owner in Cape Town that apparently stopped some black individual from going to his pub. Many of us at the time said, this seems like a weird story. It was very unusual. Apparently there was another white guy who acted as a white knight who then basically said, oh, you can't be treating this black guy like this. How dare you exclude him from the pub? The EFF got involved and wanted to, demonstrate against the pub. Some of the allegations turned out that, well, it looks like the white guy actually had some EFF connections and the whole thing was a publicity stunt. The Human Rights Commission, that kangaroo court, then said it was going to get involved and probe the incident. And then it turned out the whole incident was exactly what we thought. It was staged. The whole thing was just one big hoax by some guys who thought that they could use some race hustling to get some attention for the EFF in Cape Town. Now, for those of you who recall, actual owners of that pub, that Irish pub, had to actually shut their business. They had to shut it for a period because the EFF went there and threatened to burn the place down. And obviously they had forms of reputational damage because the owners of them were basically accused of racism all over the internet and social media. There were numerous clowns on social media that kept basically saying that this was proof that racism is just completely viral in the country, and check this out, just another example of racial exclusion. And many of us with the brain cell rightly looked at it and said, not sure this is exactly as you're portraying it, but okay, show us the evidence. And the evidence was never forthcoming. Ultimately, it turned out, as I said, the whole thing was faked. And it was kind of obvious from the narrative that was being used. The High Court has now ordered that the person who perpetrated the hoax, a Christopher Logan, must pay $1.2 million in damages to the old Irish pub and the co-owners for falsely accusing them of racism. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how you deal with race hustlers. You can't just allow them to constantly go around screaming and shouting and claiming racism when none exists. You gotta take them forward and challenge them in court. The plaintiffs in this case have even claimed successfully over R500,000 for personal damages to their lives. This is basically, stress, loss of income, usual stuff. And you know what? The only way to stop these claims of false racism is to hurt people where it hurts the most. That's usually in their pocket. Which actually brings us on to the next story. And that's around the Pretoria High School for Girls, who are basically taking the Gauteng Education Department to court for false claims of racism. For those of you who remember, there was an investigation done. It was actually done by Thabo Mbeki's foundation into the claims of racism at the school. And the actual investigation by Thabo Mbeki's foundation, and the news is that obviously, as the entire event was a farce and caused forms of reputational damage to the school themselves want to be compensated. And yet again, I wholly support this. If the allegations of racism are false, then there must be financial consequences for claiming fake racism in the first place. It's the only way to stop claims of fake racism. Which then brings me on to the next news story. And this is the news story that Bheki Cele. You remember Bheki Cele? He was the former police minister who basically claimed that, who cares about crime because, reasons. And he also said that the best way to, stop crime in the country was removing the rights to own a firearm for the purpose of self-defense, because then there'll be less gun crime. Anyway, a lot of us at the time highlighted that crime under his watch seemed to go up and get worse. The minister at the time even tried to tackle private security companies, many individuals' only refuge of safety away from criminals, by attempting to introduce new regulations around how they could operate, basically minimizing what they could do and minimizing the impact that they could have against crime. Bheki Cele is basically saying he's received a lot of threats since leaving office. He's even had a house broken. He's actually being subjected to crime. And he doesn't like that. Because you see, when you're not surrounded constantly by private security that goes up the wazoos with your own private security detail, where you can actually use SAPs as basically your own personal bodyguard, the life of crime that many individuals experience and the fear of their life being taken from them is a cause of safety. And would you know it? Bheki Cele says he's very concerned about his safety and that of his family safety. He probably should have thought about this when he was busy destroying the actual National Police Service and allowing crime to proliferate to untold levels. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what we typically refer to as the roosters coming home to roost. You reap what you sow, Mr. Cele. And at the end of the day, we all think, haha, this is poetic irony. You deserve it. Talking of what people deserve, it turns out that, as the EFF always says, give us back the land. Unless you can obviously, give us some money, in which case we'll prefer the money. Because maybe the land isn't as important as those in the political sphere commonly try to claim that it is, because according to the Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development, who I must remind you comes from the political party, the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azanzi. This isn't just like the DA or even the ANC. It's people that really believe in land restitution. It's an individual who himself campaigned on the idea of give us back the land. Well, you see, the problem is that he has now come out and said that apparently when it comes through to land restitution programs, individuals are often opting for money because they don't want the land back. What they actually want is a big fat paycheck. And very interestingly, he even goes on further to highlight that in many instances where title deeds have been handed over to beneficiaries, those beneficiaries of the new land end up taking the farm and selling it back to the previous owners, who were typically white people who they got the land from in the first place. And then they take the land, they sell it to someone else, and the land's back in the white hands of the former owners who paid for the property because the individuals don't want the farms. It's amazing how that happened. It's almost like none of us could predict that would ever happen, apart from everybody could predict it would happen. And everybody said the land isn't so as important as you keep trying to say. Jobs are, job security is, and the national living wage is what's important to most. At the end of the day, most people don't want to go waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning to milk a goat. Like, they don't want to farm. Farming's hard. Most people want to live in urban settings. They want the comforts of living in an urban life. They don't want to actually have the hardships of a rural life. But apparently, according to, all the radical politicians, give us back the land because everybody wants to return to the land. People don't want to return back to the land. Hard. If you've ever done forms of farming, it's not fun. It's really not fun. And quite often, the success of the farming is just like pot luck. You can have some really bad rains, you lose half your sheep. Because let's face it, sheep are fragile. You can have really terrible summers with no rain. You can lose half your crop because of no water. It's very difficult to control these elements. You know what people can control? Yeah, the 9-to-5 job, Monday to Friday. Just go to work, get paid a salary, and go home and watch Netflix. That's what most people want. But as I said, according to the radical politicians, that's not true. And, it's the white people's fault because they have all the land. But that's not true either. The actual people who own the majority of the land, it's actually the government. It's not even white. It's not even black. It's the government who has purchased a large amount of the land, then holds on to it, never actually transfers the title deeds. They just let somebody out on a short-term lease of it. The government's actually the largest landowner in the country. Anyway, this is an inconvenient fact. Doesn't serve political narratives, does it? In any case, that's it. That's the news. Seems like poetry to me. You can let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, bye.